And without further ado, I will be introducing our speaker and facilitator today, Amma Giamfoa. Did I get that correct?
Yeah, you got it. No worries.
She is a Ghanaian Canadian womanist, mental health therapist, registered social worker, community researcher, writer, and social justice advocate. A woman of many talents and accolades, engaged in the field of social work for the last 9 years. Her expertise is rooted in supporting and counseling youth, Black and racialized communities, and survivors of gender-based violence. Holding demonstrated history of meaningful program development and research, she has advanced and strengthened the impact of diverse programs and initiatives across the Greater Toronto Area. So if you can all give a warm and lovely welcome to Amma.
Hey, everyone. I just need to be able to share my screen, Christiana. I hope everyone's doing well. I know that I feel like we might actually have people from across Canada, so I would love to know if people can put in the chat where you're logging in from. It's always exciting to be able to see that we can have all of these conversations happening in many, many different places. And thank you all for joining. I know Black Mental Health Week is slowly coming to an end, but I'm really, really excited to have this session, especially for Black students. I was a Black student for a very long time. I used to run a mentorship program and then also, sorry?
Sorry.
It's okay. I used to run a mentorship program and I also used to be a counselor at what was formerly known as Ryerson and now Toronto Metropolitan University. And so I'm always really excited to talk to Black students about their health, about their well-being, and about their needs as they continue on their journey. So without further ado, we're gonna get started. Thank you everyone for sharing. So I got a couple of things so far. I got Scarborough, Toronto, a couple Toronto people, Edmonton folks, people in Mississauga, Rexdale. So a little bit of everything. I wanted to start us off by just grounding our space today. So we're of course gonna be talking about Black students and their health and well-being. And so I wanted to just share a couple of things to help ground our space. The first is just to care for yourself and take care of your needs. Maybe some of you are taking care of your siblings. Maybe some of you are getting your dinner ready. So if you don't have your camera on, that's cool. If you want to have your camera on, that's also fine. Whether it be that you are getting a little bit of a blanket so that you feel warm, do whatever it is that makes you feel most comfortable in this space. I also want to encourage people to acknowledge and share their wisdom. So many times when a therapist is in a space, people automatically get really quiet. And I want to name the fact that many of you, if you're not currently a student, you have been a student in the past. And so you have something to share and contribute that we all can learn from, including myself. Of course, speaking from our lived experiences, we're going to be talking about some collective experiences, but we also want to talk about where our personal experiences lie. Of course, as Black folks, we know what it means to be judged. And so we want to hold our judgments away from this space to make it as comfortable and as safe as possible. I also want to name the fact that we can honor all of our identities here. So I'm really encouraging people to bring all of themselves in this space with us. And last but not least, I want folks to be able to, of course, learn and be as comfortable as possible in terms of sharing their stories. And so what that requires from everybody is that we leave people's personal stories here, but we take the wisdom, right? So is the wisdom that we need to make sure we're asking what we need from our schools or from our teachers, is the wisdom that we have better boundaries in our classrooms, or even when it comes to our time, but we're leaving people's personal stories that they might share with us here. Awesome. Okay, so to get started, so one thing that we have been talking about over the last several years is this idea of Black joy. And I wanted to start us off by thinking about that. For many of us, we are a student for 20 plus years, even though it sounds kind of wild to say. And so I wanted to start us off by thinking about what have been some of the joyful experiences you've had as a Black student. What are the things that you were able to experience that you were really, really happy about? Was it that you were a part of a Black history group in high school? Was it that you attended Black Student Association events? What are some of the greatest joys you've experienced as a Black student? Maybe we can get one or two people to unmute, but maybe for other folks, if you feel more comfortable, you can chat. But I just wanted to start us off by thinking about some of the experiences of Black joy we've had as we've navigated our education. And we will start with Mary.
Okay, so I went to a school that was in the city, but it was not in Scarborough.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was a kind of specialist school, and it was like a school that people from all over Ontario, the country, and the world could come to, but it's like a public school.
Amazing.
And so I was there, and I was one of two Black students in my grade from Scarborough, and the alumni was about two Black students, a girl and a boy, uh, in my grade, in the older grades, and then another one was under them. But what I saw when I entered the school is that there were not a lot of Black people in the school. So it's like maybe like 400 plus kids, and we are very small, and there's even less of us from Scarborough.
Yeah.
So what happened was that I used to what I used because I used to volunteer like as a kid in Scarborough. I used to go around to a lot of the schools, and then when I got older, to go to this school, I would tell kids to think about going to this type of school because it would help them in their future. And what happened was a lot of these kids ended up coming to the school, but one of the mistakes I did as a kid was like I didn't know that the school was not diverse. Like I had no clue about that. So when I was trying to tell these other kids to come to the school, I didn't know. And then I ended up going to the school, and then other kids from Scarborough started coming to the school, and I would look at them, we would look at ourselves, and we're like, we're not represented. So what I tried to do was I went to the admissions, and I tried to talk to them about what the problem was, because we had a lot of students that were having problems adjusting to this difference,
Of course.
because we all grew up in Scarborough. We went to a very diverse school, very diverse population. Then we would go to this other school in the city, and it was like we were not there. So I told them that they had to start changing some of the way that they looked at students in their application process. They had to change maybe some of the ways that they did like orientation and some of the events to make us feel welcome there. And it took like a long time, because when I was doing it, I didn't actually really know what I was trying to say to them. I was saying a lot of words and things, but all I knew was that these younger kids who were like a year or two younger than me, they were just feeling so closed off, a little bit angry. They're thinking about dropping out. Like it was not working. So I had to try and explain to these adults what was going on, until they started to see what was going on and change the process as well. So that is something that I'm very proud of, that I did, because I kind of felt like I was participating in their alienation. I didn't know that, because I felt it myself too, right? I felt alienated too. But I knew that something had to be done, so that we were not feeling these feelings or thinking these things, because we did nothing wrong. We
Of
just wanted to go to school, right? That's all we wanted to do.
Yeah,
So
thank you
that's
so much.
something that I'm very happy I did there.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I hear two things in that story, right? This experience of feeling excluded, of having struggles, but from that, really, you were doing a lot of advocacy at a really young age to make sure that you were creating a safe space for yourself and for all the other Black students that would come. So that is a space of joy, because I'm sure it also taught you a lot about yourself. And other folks, maybe we can get you to write in the chat What's one experience of joy you had as a student? And I know sometimes it can feel hard when you've had difficult experiences in the educational space, but I still wanted to make space for us to think about if there was a joyful experience, right? Is it that you met one other person and you connected with that person and have still become friends with them? I have Christiana sharing that she was in the African Student Association and the dance group, right? But I think it's really important that we think about some of these experiences of joy. Christiana, I'll get you to talk for like a minute and then we'll go forward just because I know there's quite a bit to touch on.
No, sorry, no problem. I just wanted to add also, like, there was like a mentorship program that I was a part of. Um, that really definitely gave me a lot of Black joy. It was like, it was a, there was it was a Black women mentorship program at Women's Health and Women's Hands. And it was essentially Black women, I think, in health, science. There were some lawyers and things like that, where you would be like directly connected to someone who you'd want to, like a career that you want to go into. That was definitely a very great experience as a Black student for me.
Thank you for sharing that. Amazing, amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And even the aspect of mentorship as a student, right? You know, so much of our experiences is that we often don't feel represented. And so the aspect of being able to be mentored and support by another Black person, especially another Black woman, is a phenomenal experience of Black joy. Okay, so Serena shares something that brought me joy in school was learning. I loved being around my friends, but it means a lot as a young person to be able to seek out education. Yeah, as a young Black woman, especially to seek out education. Thank you so much for sharing that. There is a power in it and an empowerment and being able to educate yourself and do that in so many different ways. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so of course we're talking about Black mental health. And before we begin talking about it in the context of students, I wanted to give us a more general way of looking at our mental health. Sometimes the way we talk about mental health is we're actually talking about mental illness or challenges to our mental health. So we'll say something like, that person has mental health. And one of the things that I'm always really intentional about naming is that we all have mental health. And so this definition lets us see how connected we are to that. And so it says mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, how we feel, how we act. It helps to determine how we handle stress, how we relate to others, and how we make choices. And why that is so important, especially for us to understand, is we're allowed from that definition to be able to break down some of the stigmas of what we think mental health is and who do we think has mental health challenges, right? And the reality is that if we all have mental health, then we all have to be pouring into our mental health and taking care of it in different ways. And the CMHA also included something that I think is really important, right? Because as I said earlier, sometimes we're thinking about the challenges to our mental health or mental health illnesses, but these are 6 factors that they say can help us with reporting positive mental health. And so I want you to keep this in mind as we go forward today. One of the things is a sense of purpose, right? What is the sense of purpose that we have in connection to why we're here on this earth? Strong relationships. This is such an undermined aspect of being able to care for our health. So often we say community matters, but literally having a strong community can actually support your mental health and well-being. You're not as isolated and you have resources in your corner, right? Feeling connected to others, having a good sense of self, coping with stress, enjoying life. These are all things that are also included in our mental health. And I think they're really aspects that each of us can be able to pour into. And so I love naming these as a way to get us started in thinking about mental health in a way that feels good to us. Okay, so this picture of little Black beautiful children is something that I thought was important to include. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, we are in school at minimum for, let's say what, like 15 years? And so it's really, really important that we can sit with and think about what are all the different things that impacted me in my educational journey. And so I want people to think about things like, how were you encouraged throughout your educational experience? There was a comment by Serena who shared this aspect of really being excited to learn and to be educated. And one thing that my mom always kind of instilled with me is that nobody can take your education away from you. And that was something that was really, really encouraging to me and made me really motivated in many ways to pursue my education in a way, because I knew that nobody could take that away from me, that that's something that's mine, that belongs to me. And so I want folks to think about, who are the people that encouraged you throughout your life and your time? Maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a mentor, maybe it was your siblings. I also want us to think about the direct and indirect messages that we received, right? So I am African, I'm Ghanaian, and we get a lot of messages as Black people about education, about what educational paths we could take. I always make the joke that, if I wasn't African, I would be a writer, because, my parents didn't know how to support the aspect of me trying to pursue poetry and writing when I was younger, right? And so sometimes we get these direct and indirect messages about what are the career paths should we take as people to be successful. A lot of us will talk about the fact that our parents wanted us to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, and kind of take a really traditional path in our education. And those thoughts can, of course, impact the programs that we have and even how we're feeling about ourselves in our journey. I also want people to think about the fact that we often will put our self-care and our mental health on the back burner as students. We think so much about the timelines, about the essays, about doing a good job in the classroom, that we can really neglect ourselves. And so thinking about, how do I prioritize my self-care and my mental health, whether it is that you're a new graduate or currently in school, it is so, so important. And we'll talk about what that looks like a little bit later. The other thing that I want people to think about is this aspect of nurturing my personal development. So one thing that I always say is that the classroom is not the only place that you learn. You learn in the Black Student Association, you learn on an internship, you learn if you get a placement. There's many, many ways for us to be able to learn and pursue our dreams, develop personally, that don't actually exist in the classroom. And that's a really important thing to remember. And we have to think about what nurtures our personal development, what nurtures our well-being, and then also what nurtures your capacity to pursue your dreams, right? Each of us have some sense of a dream within us, and it's really important that we find the places that make us feel well, make us allow us to be able to develop in many ways and not just the classroom. And last but not least, what is your relationship like with your mental health as a student or new grad? Oftentimes we can be consistently thinking about, okay, right now I'm in my first year, I have to do X, Y, and Z in my second year, my third year. And even something that I noticed with myself and a lot of other folks is, because of how long we're students, when we graduate, we kind of go through this crisis of, what am I going to do? I'm not a student anymore. What does that mean? And even being able to get used to working in the field all the time, right? So, let's say as a student, you're working part-time, a few hours a week. Now, all of a sudden, when you graduate, there's all these expectations of, what am I going to do next? Am I going to go get my master's? Am I going to be able to find a job in my field, right? So I think it's really important that in this journey, you consistently think about, what is your relationship like with your mental health? And so I have a lot of comments here, and, folks are sharing, my older brother was a big support for me, talking about saying no and taking my education away from me. Absolutely. Mary also agreed with that aspect of the doctor, lawyer, engineer. And Serena shared she's Jamaican. And if I wasn't in a good job, I would definitely be encouraged to complete higher education to get one. Absolutely. Can I share? So after I got my master's, I went to go buy a Kente stool. Even the man that was selling me the Kente stool, he said, "Oh, so now PhD." And I said, I haven't graduated. Like, I haven't even graduated. I didn't know this man from anywhere. And that was the first thing he said to me, right? So education means a lot to our community. And sometimes it can be a beautiful thing. It can be encouraging, but it also can create a lot of pressure that we might be holding. Okay. Amazing. And so I wanted to talk about the Black student experience, because we're talking all this week about Black mental health, about Black mental wellness. And I wanted to give us a clear way of thinking about what this looks like for Black students, right? And so, when you're going to school, you should have some sort of backpack or something that you could put your books in, your pens in, your notebooks in. And each of us are carrying that, right? Because that's a part of the journey of being a student. You need to be able to have a certain level of things prepared, and you're walking with them every single day as a student, right? You pick it up in the morning, you put it down. But one of the things that I think is important to name is the fact that Black students have and hold an invisible backpack that they actually don't let go of, right? And it's those experiences that impact how we're showing up every day. It impacts our wellness. It impacts our ability to concentrate, but it's an invisible backpack. And it's also very different from what our white students are facing in their lives. It is different than the South Asian students. Our unique journey in our education is so different. I'm not sure if everybody's heard, but in the last week or so, there was a 6-year-old student that was locked in a classroom, a Black student in Toronto. And so there is an intersection of the experiences that we are carrying that look very, very, very different for us every single day. And once again, the struggle with it is, one, it's invisible. Two, it's not like the physical backpack that we have with our books and our pens that we can just drop. It's something that we're carrying with us and can be weighing us down in a lot of ways. And people don't necessarily know that. Our friends might sometimes not know, our family members sometimes might even know, and especially the education system itself. And folks, it seems like folks have heard about it around this story. And it's something that I wanted to bring up because anti-Black racism, many of us first experience it in the education system. And so it is a ongoing challenge and reality that unfortunately we are facing and are just consistently trying to heal from, right? And it also reminds us of what were our own experiences in school? How did that impact us? How did that shape us? And so I wanted to spend some time just reflecting on some of the experiences that are part of that invisible backpack that Black students are carrying. What would some people name? And we can put it in the chat. Folks can feel free to unmute. Christiana, if you can keep me for time as well, give me like a 15-minute countdown and a 10-minute countdown as well, if that's okay. But I want us to maybe name in this space the different types of burdens that we might be carrying. And why I think that's important is because sometimes we don't get the opportunity to name those things, but we're feeling them. We're feeling them in our mind, we're feeling them in our body. And so being able to express them and validate them and affirm them is really important. And so I have so far stigmas, absolutely, right? Stigma around mental health, around other issues or challenges that people might be facing. Christiana also put isolation. Yeah, that we can feel really isolated in student spaces. We might be all in the same program, we're going to the same high school, but Black students in so many ways can be excluded from different experiences. And then Mary put, I hate these teachers determining our intelligence. Absolutely. And, making so many different wounds at such an early age. So thank you for sharing that, Mary. Christiana wrote tokenism. Yes, right? We have accepted this amount of Black students in X, Y, and Z program, but how are you making them feel safe? How are you making them feel appreciated or comfortable? Mary put, telling people you can't do the math, seeming quote unquote as not as brilliant as some other folks, using ableist language, telling people all they're good for is jail, right? Really, 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 really horrible stereotyping in ways that is so harmful. Sarah put lack of community support, lack of community in a cohort. Yeah, part of the reason why you can thrive in a school environment is a community, is having that in a community. And Mary was naming that they did that to all of my brothers. Yeah, and what happens, right? as a result of these experiences. So these teachers or these educators do these things, say these things, and then what happens to us and our children and our students as a result. Okay, no worries. I have Serena also naming stereotyping. Yeah, the ways that Black children are always stereotyped, the way we are always adultified, even though we are still young folks making mistakes. Telling me if I'm not careful, I'll be like these other Black girls that end up pregnant and dropping out of school. Absolutely, absolutely. All of these overt, racist, anti-Black sentiments that are so harmful. In so many different ways. Telling us we're selling drugs on school property, absolutely. And I put here, I named some of them as well. So of course, we've talked about anti-Black racism, we've talked about these childhood experiences, exclusion, that lack of support, negative self-talk, you know, and as a result of hearing some of these things, how do you begin talking to yourself? One thing that I want to name too is like the experiences of immigration. You know, part of when you start to both at elementary school, sometimes our parents, I know my parents were quite trusting of the school system. And the reason why is because back home, like the expectation is that these people are teachers, they're educated, they're going to take care of your kids. And so sometimes our parents can kind of take that mindset and feel like, okay, they're at school, so nothing should be going wrong, right? Or these people should be treating my child just like they're treating every other child. And that's not the case. One of the things, I'm seeing a lot of different things named here in the chat, saying we're good for nothing. And Mary's validating the fact that we can internalize it, absolutely, right? And we talked about policing criminalization and what that can mean. I remember one time in high school, there was a Caribbean store that a lot of us used to go to get our lunch. And then there was a Tim Hortons across the street. And in the summertime, they always had the police on the side with the Caribbean store where a lot of the Black students were. And there was one time where one of the white students beat up the security guard that was in front of the Tim Hortons. And the police, one, shouldn't even have been watching high school students get their lunch and telling us to go back to class. But two, they didn't intervene on something that actually happened across the street because they were so in their minds thinking that we were doing something wrong, right? And we named internalized oppression, racial trauma, this aspect of imposter syndrome, right? Because of all of these experiences of feeling excluded, we begin to think, okay, do I belong here? I'm sure, Mary, the example that you gave, a lot of the students started to feel like that. It's like, should I belong here? But it's a school. The school, if the school's purpose is to learn, then we belong there, right? Family, community, religious expectations. Does anyone know what the triple burden is? Okay, so the triple burden is actually what Mary was talking about. So as Black students in particular, you are coming to school to learn, right? But oftentimes, because of anti-Black racism, a couple of things are happening. One, you might be experiencing racism with your peers, so you're educating or pushing back against that. Two, you might be experiencing anti-Black racism with your teachers, so you're pushing back, educating, naming, trying to create different resources, like Mary was talking about making the space more accessible. And mind you, you were a child or a youth resisting in that way and having to educate grown people who are supposed to be educated about what it is that they need to do to make the space safe for students. And then thirdly, because you're not getting educated in an adequate way, you still have the burden of being forced to learn and having to find that education in different ways, right? And so that's the triple burden, is that you're carrying all of those things at once as Black students. And so I name all of these, and Serena put race, gender, class, absolutely, right? Our class deeply impacts it, our gender, you know, all of these, I'm just making sure that I'm reading so much of what is said here. But I think what's obvious is that there is so many different ways we experience oppression as Black students. And so one of the things that is important is that we name that so that we know that we are not alone in that experience. But we also slowly begin to recognize that my mental health and well-being is deeply important, because sometimes, and most times, these systems are not set up to allow us to thrive, right? They're not allowing us to thrive in all the ways that we need, because these are the invisible experiences that we're walking with sometimes. Okay. And so part of the reason why I share that is because, of course, we can begin to feel burnt out. We can begin to have a lot of challenges, a lot of difficulties, a lot of exhaustion. So if you're dealing with, and part of the reason why I do this exercise is because you're usually not just dealing with racial trauma, right? There's at least 3 or 4, each person can probably say, yeah, I've experienced this in my school career, in my life. And why I think this is so important is because if those are all the things that we're carrying with us, then how do those experiences impact our well-being? You know, you're likely gonna, I think Mary was saying the example of people were not necessarily always going to class, feeling excluded, right? How does that impact you mentally? Of course, you're gonna experience anxiety when you're feeling like the police at your school is always consistently thinking that you're creating a crime or doing something wrong, or even the fact that you're not getting any encouragement, right? All of that is going to create a lot of challenges in your health, your well-being, your emotions, to the point of making you feel like, do I even want to go to school? And Christiana is saying in the chat, if it was feelings like, was this even worth it? Is this even worth it? And what does that feeling do? It pushes us out of the system. And so why I name this is because we have to begin thinking about what are the experiences that I'm having? How is it impacting me? And how do we stay in a space that allows us to feel taken care of, that we still have that lit match, and we can slowly begin to notice when we're coming on the other side of it, when we're feeling down, when we're feeling burnt out, when we're feeling like we have absolutely no energy to give. So one of the things that I love to talk about is our emotions, because we have all of these feelings and experiences, but sometimes we can learn to suppress them. We can not validate them. You know, some of our families or our parents didn't necessarily see the importance of our emotions. You know, I gave the example, I had to do an engagement yesterday, and I gave the example of, you know, crying in my house wasn't a thing, right? My parents would be like, you're not paying bills. What reason do you have to cry? Right? And we can begin to slowly internalize that and feel as if, oh, then crying doesn't have a purpose, or it doesn't mean I'm a strong person if I'm crying. And what our emotions do is they're trying to communicate something to us. They're trying to let us know something. They're trying to tell us how we're feeling about a situation. They're trying to remind us of our boundaries, and they're also trying to protect us. And so it's really, really important that we slowly begin to understand what are our emotions, what are the feelings that we are experiencing, and it really ensures that we don't end up on the other side of that burnt match. Christiana, did you want to share something?
Yeah, just quickly. Sometimes I even felt like I wasn't allowed to be like fatigued or like tired around like my parents, or not even just parents, but like anybody like with authority. Like I remember like if I was like felt tired like in my room and someone knocked on my door, I'd be like,
Yeah.
I'm up, I'm awake, like
Yeah.
I'm alert.
Yeah, because you can't rest. God forbid you rest. You're lazy. What are you doing? Are you
Yeah.
working? Like, those are the types of questions or responses that you're gonna get, right? And then we have Mary putting something so absolutely true. So one, your mom says, love everyone, and your dad says, trust no one. But also Mary put the Black body talks very loudly. I've been ignoring mine, but I'm realizing I cannot. Absolutely. We can't afford to ignore our body at all. I love that, Mary. And the emotion sensation wheel. Did I send this to you, Christiana?
Yes, we will. I believe so.
Okay, I just wanted to double check. If I didn't, you can literally put, you should be able to find it on Google if you put emotion sensation wheel. Yeah, you should be able to find it on Google or even on Pinterest, but I'll also make sure Christiana sends it out to everybody. And Mary put, I was going to post, who has time for burnout without these racist incidents, but I realized it's dismissive. You are right, Christiana. We need rest too. We are humans. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. And so I wanted to give us some gentle reminders in the path of being students, right? And especially in thinking about Black student mental health. So one is that I used to work, as I said, at a university. And one of the things that I would note is that by the time I saw Black students, they were in crisis, right? They were in deep, deep crisis. And I want to name the fact that you don't need to experience an extreme type of trauma or challenge or crisis before you get support. All of us are worthy of a listening ear, of a supportive space, of a place that we can just process all that we talked about just now. And so I really want to encourage folks to know that there's a lot of different ways for you to access mental health supports at your school and in community that can be helpful in encouraging and supporting your path. I want to name the fact that your therapist can look like you. They can reflect your experiences. I know Scarborough's in the house. I'm from Scarborough originally. They can have braids, right? Like there's lots of different ways of being able to get different supports and resources with therapists that look like you and understand your experiences. And so it's about looking for them. Taibu is definitely one of those spaces and resources that you can go to as well. Thirdly, I want to name this fact of redefining strength, right? So part of my own struggle as a student was there was a time where I was going through a lot of family stress. And it was one of those times in life where you feel like you're going to cry every minute of the day. And I know a lot of people can relate to that. And part of what I did was I saw strength as one thing. So I didn't see strength as me being able to cry or express my emotions or ask for help. And I struggled in silence. And one of the things that I've had to do over the last several years is continue to redefine how I look at strength. Strength is also asking for help. It's also caring for your mental health. It's also realizing what somebody said in the chat, which is that we are also human, right? And we need to be able to pause and take care of our needs in a very holistic way. We lived through the pandemic, and so surviving and thriving looks different each day. And sometimes you need to be able to take a pause. You need to be able to ask for what you need, whether it be from your family, from your friends, and from your community, and start off with the basics, trying to get good sleep, right? Think about what the basic needs that you have are for every day, and then you can move to thriving, but each day looks different. We've named this already, but I want to connect something else to it. You are a whole human before you're a student or a career, right? So we can get so caught up in wanting to get good grades, wanting to be able to make sure we're able to get into that master's program, that we don't recognize our human needs. And so I really want to stress the fact that it's okay for you to prioritize yourself before you prioritize other parts of things that you might be experiencing in terms of essays and exams and all of that. Give yourself permission to ask for that extension and support. So part of what I didn't do when I was going through that difficult time, I didn't ask for an extension. Nope. I was sitting there like a fool, having my hard time, having such a hard time concentrating, trying to get through essays and all these other things because I, one, didn't feel comfortable enough to share what was going on, and two, just didn't want to ask for that extra help. It's there. There are resources that are able to get you those supports, but you have to name it. You know, one thing that I always tell people within the university college experience is that high school, I remember one of my high school teachers telling me this. She said that they want as many people to graduate high school as possible. So no, like for the most part, they'll try to push everyone through, right? And in college and university, nobody cares. Nobody cares. It's all dependent on you. And so you really have to advocate for yourself, and you really have to prioritize your wellness, but also what your educational space can look like. This one, it requires another day, but I also want to name the fact that sometimes we are struggling because we're reconciling that our program is actually not for us. It doesn't feel like it's for us. It doesn't feel like, and not just in the sense around exclusion. I'm actually not talking about that for this time around. I'm more so talking about the fact that we're in a program that we don't like or don't feel aligned to, and it's causing stress because we know we want to do something else. And I'm not saying to drop your program tomorrow, but I am saying to think about what are ways that you can support yourself and really be mindful of what it is that you want and how can you still work towards that, even in this moment if you're still in that program. Last but not least, accessibility resources are at your school and they're there to set you up for success. So I think a lot of people also end up realizing that they learn differently in university and college because there's not some of those safeguards as there is in high school. And one of the things I want to encourage people to do is just figure out what is in your accessibility spaces, right? Like, what are the resources that they have? Some of those accessibility resources will literally teach you how to be a better essay writer, right? You can use that support. There are accessibility resources that are about time management. All of us need to be able to know what is in our space, because that's a part of your tuition. That's another thing. All of the things that are in the school are actually a part of your tuition. You're paying for it regardless. So you need to be able to make sure that you're taking advantage of what's there and what's available. And then the last thing is around counseling resources. So there is, in every college and university, and even in high schools, there's always a counselor. So there's a counseling center, there's a social worker, there should be somebody that is there for you to be able to explore different realities that you might be facing. And in the school that I was at, you can specifically ask for a Black therapist, right? So you may not get them on your very first session, because the first session is just to kind of figure out what it is that you're looking for and needing, but you can ask for an ongoing Black therapist and they'll provide it to you. And most universities at this point, if they are progressive in one way or another, they should have some sort of system around that, right? So that's one way to be able to access counseling supports, both individual and group. The second thing is that you all have benefits. And so if you haven't opted out of your benefits, you have at minimum $500 to be able to get access to mental health supports, at least. But a lot of schools over the last several years have changed that. So for example, Toronto Metropolitan University, when I was there, it was $1,000, right? So I want people to really, once again, think about the resources that are actually available to you and use them. And then of course, community resources, Taibu Community Health Center, Africa Center, all of these spaces have counseling and resources to be able to support your health and well-being as a student. Okay, and sorry, Christiana, did you want to share something?
No, I was just gonna say, make sure y'all use them supports. I was just gonna second that, because there's, like, for example, as a student, I had so much back stress, so much trauma and just stress in my back. And I was like, I went to the clinic. It was like physical clinic. They did massages, acupuncture. I was like, say word. And I ended up using those supports for that kind of stress. So make sure you kind of have an understanding for sure of like what your school has access to. So many things.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just want to be mindful of the comments as well. So Serena talked about, personally, I've had a hard time asking for extensions because getting C's during my degree, but during my final year of university, I decided it was time. I asked for extensions in 2 to 3 classes and got A's on those assignments. And I want to say that people learn differently, right? So sometimes we need a little bit extra time. And so thank you so much for sharing that. And I think Mary had also placed in the chat around the spaces are anti-Black. Absolutely. A lot of these spaces we all have stories. Look at how many different examples we all had of anti-Blackness in that, but we have to figure out, how am I going to protect myself? How am I going to care for myself? And once again, maybe there's some resources in the school that you are just like, no, I can't do this. But I think what I want to encourage is recognizing that your school actually has a responsibility to you to make sure that those resources are available. Okay, so we have 10 minutes. So, okay, I think I'm going to skip I'm going to be really quick with this, and then we'll go to something else. So, of course, as we've talked about, there's so many different things that are happening for us as Black students. And one of the things that I love talking about is not just self-care, it's soul, community care, and cultural connection, right? If we're recognizing that invisible backpack that we're carrying on us as Black students, then we also have to think about, okay, what things can keep me well? And I want you to look at this dimensions of wellness diagram as a tool to be able to think about, what are the things that I need, right? I need physical rest. I need physical activity that could be exercise. I need to be able to have a social life. And maybe that's not always people that are in your class, right? Maybe it's that African Student Association, the Caribbean Student Association, Black Student Association, financial, right? Of making sure you're applying for those grants. There's so many different things that are happening throughout your educational space and period, and your wellness matters. And so to begin thinking about it a little bit more practically, I want you to think about all these dimensions of wellness that need your time, need your support, and need your care. The last thing I want to say about this is, one, we talk about self-care as like an investment, and I definitely think it is, right? We're investing in certain actions so we feel certain ways about ourselves. But I also want you to think about what you need to divest from. What do you need to step away from? I will encourage everyone to do a little social media exercise or experiment with yourself. I have been finding that the days that I wake up and I'm scrolling, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to do anything for the rest of the day. I'm done. I'm comparing myself to everybody. I'm saying I don't have X, Y, and Z done. I don't have, this big house or whatever, right? So also think about the things that you need to divest from to take care of your mental health in this journey. And especially because we talked a lot about racial trauma, I also want people to think about what replenishes you. Who's in your tribe? Who are the people that are closest to you that can support your journey as you navigate school? And also, what meaningful practices can you connect to that connects you to your ancestral roots, that allows you to know the truth of who you are? Because that's a really, really, really important part to feeling empowered, especially when you're in spaces that are anti-Black. Okay. And so we're going to talk about my favorite thing, which is something called RAIN. I'm going to try to breeze through this. We can't dive into it in the ways that we need. However, it's a good tool, and you'll also get a resource about it. So reasons why I love RAIN: it is a practical step in, one, you being able to understand, sit with your thoughts, feelings, emotions better. And it lets you kind of walk through a couple of steps that allows you, one, a little bit more insight, two, compassion, and three, being able to release certain experiences. And I want you to think back to that burnout picture, that match, right, of all of those little ways that we can feel burnt out. I find that RAIN is a really powerful tool to allow us to process. Okay. And so there's 4 steps. And if people want to just kind of jot down random notes in their phone, they can. So the first step of RAIN is to slow us down. So sometimes when something happens, we can feel so overwhelmed, we can feel so triggered, we can feel so charged that it's actually hard to figure out what's happening, right? And so I want folks to be able to first start off when something happens or a challenge comes up, think about what emotion are you feeling, right? What did this thing trigger in me? Did it trigger disappointment? Did it trigger thoughts that I'm not good enough? And I want you to think about how it impacted your mind, how it impacted your body, how it impacted your spirit. I want you to think about what thoughts are coming. Is it that you're a failure? Is it that you're never going to be good enough? You're never going to be able to graduate? And then I also want you to think about the body, right? What am I feeling in my body? So if I asked you right now to describe what anger feels like, you can tell me that maybe your jaw starts to feel clenched, right? Or that you start to feel hot, or you start to feel so overwhelmed you don't even know what to do. Each emotion that we experience and have, our bodies feel it too, and they experience it as well. Okay. The second step for RAIN is to accept. And why it's important to accept is, like I said earlier, we can sometimes really learn to suppress our emotions at a very early age. And sometimes we're not accepting what has happened, right? And don't get it twisted, I'm not saying accept mistreatment from people. I'm saying, okay, accepting that as somebody, I feel like somebody betrayed me, accepting that moment, right? And the emotions that you're feeling as a result. And it's okay that you feel uncomfortable with the feeling, right? It's okay if you feel uncomfortable with it, because it's important to recognize that some things are going to make us feel uncomfortable because it crossed our boundaries. The third step, and my favorite step, is to investigate the moment with kindness, right? So I want everyone to think about, because I think we've all had this, where there was something that happened and we got somebody who gave advice that we didn't ask for, and you're like, why would you even say that? Like, what help? That was not helpful. Like, that wasn't helpful. That was useless information. Like, I didn't ask for that, right? Or it was so critical and you were already feeling bad about yourself. I think we've all had a time like that, right? And then I want you to think about a time where you were going through something and somebody said something really kind to you. They said something really empathetic. It made you feel understood. It made you feel heard. It made you feel affirmed. It made you feel right. Like, oh, I have a reason to feel this way. We can sometimes be the first thing, right? We can be really critical of ourselves. And so I want us to know that we can give the compassion to ourselves that we usually give to other people. And so that's what this step is about. So think about, how can I be gentler with myself? What kindness can I say to myself in this moment? And if it's hard for you to say something kind or compassionate, think about what somebody who loves you, that's the clarity, loves you would say to you to help encourage you in that moment. Last step is natural awareness. And this is the idea that we are not like shackled down to one event, right? So just because I did bad in one assignment doesn't mean I'm going to fail the whole class. And even if I didn't do the greatest in that one assignment, there are things that I might have done well in that, right? So recognizing that experiences come and go, emotions come and go, and it's okay for us to use language that makes us understand that those experiences can come and go, and one moment won't define our whole career as students. Okay. And so I wanted before to be able to have experience for us to be able to go through, but because of time, it'll be too hard. But I wanted to say thank you. I know it's been a very, very, very busy week. I'm really, really happy that I got to end it with all of you. And so I wanted to do a little bit of a check out of your sun, your ocean, and your sand from this session. So one thing that gave you joy today, your ocean is one thing that's kind of rising to the surface after this session. And your sand is what's one thing that's grounding you as you're leaving our conversation today. I can maybe start as people start to slowly think. One thing that's coming up for me is just how unfortunately common these experiences are. And the challenges that Black students across their time are experiencing. But I think it's even more of a reason that we have to connect to community and come to events like this where we feel affirmed, but we also get tools to be able to explore what's showing up with us. Awesome. So somebody else, so you can unmute, you can type in the chat, sun, ocean, sand. One thing that gave you joy, one thing that's showing up or rising for you, and then one thing that's grounding from today's conversation.
There's a comment in the chat that says from Samantha, joy being in this space with you ladies.
Amazing. Thank you, Samantha, for being here.
One thing that rose to the surface for me is asking for help.
Mm.
And one thing that gave me joy is also being in this space.
Yeah, amazing. And Mary shared a couple of things, being here and hearing everyone's experiences, but also learning these tips from Amma. Ocean, how much we can't run away from racism, but we deserve self-care and access to resources that are available. One thing that's grounding me right now is hope. Thank you for sharing that. Sun, it gave me joy to be a part of this session. Ocean feels gratitude and optimism for my future as a student and an employee. I love that. And sand, I'm going to pay attention to the natural awareness portion of rain. I'm not my worst thoughts. Absolutely, absolutely. And I saw somebody come on screen. I don't know if you want to also say something.
Yeah, I just want to say, it's been a pleasure being here. I was a student. I went to Ryerson as well. Amazing. And I'm a mother of a 16-year-old in high school. And just learning these situations, learning what you're saying will help me to be a better mom to him, support him, because as a Black student in, school in Durham, it can be very difficult and challenging. So
of course,
now I get some tidbits that I can use to support him. And I'm an advocate anyway for my kids. So
of course, Yes. And thank you for joining, and being able to get this information to keep being able to do that advocacy, because also the other thing that I think is so important about Black parents is when you advocate for your child, you're also advocating for other Black kids as well. Yeah.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Any other final shares before we slide off? Amazing. Well, it's been a pleasure. I'm really happy that I got to spend my Thursday with all of you. Feel free to stay connected, and then I will pass it back over.
Wow, this has been a truly wonderful session, Emma. Thank you so much for really diving into, our needs and challenges, and also how we could connect and take care of our wellness as students and also as parents, supporting their children. I just wanted to let folks know that there is a feedback survey link in the chat, so definitely leave your feedback for the session, especially if it brought you joy and you enjoyed it. We have a few links as well for services to access from Tropicana, Africa Center, and Taibu. And I've also left, of course, Emma's socials in the chat. I think it may have been, um, I'll share it again just for folks who are leaving. But thank you again for tuning in. We have one last youth event and family and youth, friends and everyone on Saturday, March 11th from 1 to 7:30 p.m. It's at Tropicana Youth Services in Scarborough. So please come out for those events. There'll be an art showcase, food, games, everything. It's going to be fun. So thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you.
So,
All right.
yeah.
Bye,
Take care,
everyone.
everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.